Good evening, guten Abend, everybody. Welcome to the talk that we've titled a bit mysteriously, Speculative Activism. I'm sure that our panelists will elaborate on what that means or doesn't mean for them. And in order to get stuck in right away, I'd like to welcome and thank a lot Anab Jain, who's based in London with her studio Superflux, and who's also the professor of design investigations at Universität für Angewandte Kunst, University of Applied Arts here in Vienna. And I will give the word straight away to Anab to introduce our other two panelists, who will then, and we are really happy that we could convince both of them to show their work at Vienna Design Week. If you haven't yet, check them out, check their rooms later on, or maybe tomorrow. But I'm sure most of you will already have done that. Anna, thank you very much.
Thanks, Gabriel. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's a real pleasure. I wish I could be there in person. I miss being in Vienna. Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here. So I'll just kind of lay a little bit of context. So I wanted to start by really reflecting on what the word design means. So originally, the word design, imported to French from English, meant no more than what is called relooking. To relook means to give a new and better look or shape to something, a chair, a car, a lamp, an interior, which would otherwise remain too clumsy, too severe, or too raw without the veneer of design. But the question is that what and where should we be relooking today? Our concerns today can no longer be about pursuing the dreams of the 20th century, dreams of an industrialized society, creating and consuming with little regard to the environment or the structural inequalities it was generating. Today, we can take responsibility as designers to relook at the challenges that face us with the rigor and skills that design gives us. So building on the traditions of critical thinking in architecture, my own work at my studio in Superflux in London, as well as the educational work at the Design Investigations Department at the University of Applied Arts, Angewandte, is a sort of a hybrid and experimental approach. We borrow and build on the disciplines of industrial design, experience design, and speculative design to design questions about ways in which we can navigate the challenges around climate crisis, labor and automation, soft power, racial injustice, mental health, and much more. These questions are intended to provoke critical thinking, but also demonstrate nuanced responses through these challenges and also present opportunities, questions that speculate possibilities forward. So with this sort of a context, this kind of design context to today's panel, I'm really delighted to welcome two talented guests to the panel. I want to introduce both of them and then give them an opportunity to present their work, and then we'll have some 10 minutes for questions. So Dr. Helga Schmidt is a designer, artist, researcher, and educator. She's a resident at Somerset House. We share the same studio, actually. And course leader for BA Graphic Design and Media Design at London College of Communication. In 2018, she was a designer in residence at the Design Museum in London. Helga worked as a researcher at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, as a senior tutor at the Royal College of Art, and internationally as a designer and an artist. Her work has been exhibited worldwide, including the Serpentine Gallery, the Design Museum, Dia Art Foundation, New York, Z33 in Hazlitt, and V&A Museum. She has received international awards, including the Art and Type Directors Award, as well as a Fulbright and the DAAD Scholarship. Helga is holding an MA from the School of Visual Arts in New York and a PhD from the Royal College of Art. Thanks, Helga, for being with us. And Felix Lenz is a multidisciplinary artist and designer working at the intersection of technology, politics, and environment. By combining scientific research with artistic practice, his work comprises installation design and moving imagery, catalysts of discussion and change. His installations have been exhibited at various international museums, festivals, and conferences, including the Ars Electronica Festival, the European Forum ADBA, the London Design Biennale, the Istanbul Design Biennale, and the Vienna Biennale. and is part of the permanent collection at the Museum of Applied Arts in Vienna. His work received recently an honorable mention from the Innovation Cell of the UN Department of Political and Peace-Building Affairs. Lenz is currently studying at my department in Design Investigations at the University of Applied Arts, and we're very proud that he's able to show his work here today. So, Helga, maybe you want to start by sharing your work, and then Felix.
Okay, thank you so much for the lovely introduction, and thank you so much for the invitation and that I can be here. Thank you. And thank you to everyone, because you're giving us pretty much the most valuable thing you have. It's your time, and you don't even know how long you will be stuck with us here. Let's see. No, not that mean. Okay. So in my work, I deal with time, and I started already in 2011. So the topic of time is with me for around 9 years now, and it has started with a PhD in design interactions, and that's a bit the link in a way to this panel discussion in this kind of critical and speculative design. I started very broad with this idea of time, really didn't know where to go. I think I read books about it for 1 year, the first year of my PhD, got completely lost. But at some point I found a word, and this word really became, that's when you do your PhD, you zoom in and you find something, and then you know it's right. And it's called uchronia. So you're probably all familiar with the idea of utopia. So what's utopia for the place is uchronia for time. So utopos from the Greek, and uchronos, so no time, no place. And in my work, I'm really interested in bringing this idea of thinking about alternative time systems to life. So why are we not doing what we do for the place with time? And pretty much all my projects evolve around this idea of how we can rethink how we experience time, how we structure it, from a very artistic to a very practical level in a way. I guess for me, this kind of pandemic was one of the most interesting things, because I think usually when I do my talks, I always start with these kind of slides. We are in this process of acceleration. We don't have any time at all. We are stressed. And I think if I would have a slide presentation today, I wouldn't start with it necessary, because I think we all went through a different process now. We kind of stepped out of this typical rhythm. We were probably maybe a bit, bound to our homes, but our work life has changed. Some were furloughed and didn't have no structure in their lives at all, and had to rethink and find a rhythm. That's pretty much this kind of stop button I always wish to happen. And what I always want people to do is rethink their relationship. And I think time is something quite interesting, because in a way, when you think of time, if you would draw it, most people probably draw the symbol of the clock. This is kind of the thing, if you grow up in a Western system, that's what you have embedded as a child. And this is what becomes kind of almost like a sixth sense to you. So you know how long 5 minutes are, how long is an hour. So it's something kind of tangible to you. And my work deals with this idea to unlearn time, to step out of this. So probably if you've seen the work here at the Design Festival, at the Design Week, it is kind of a call to action, so it's this banner, and it's called Take Your Time. And I want you to remove all your clocks, if it's on your arm, on your phone, tape it over your microwave and so on. And then take a day, 2 days, 48 hours, or ideally even a week, and then live by a different time giver. So really remove yourself out of this kind of societal construct. And I have different postcards, it's kind of suggestions of what you could do. So what is a time giver? The German word Zeitgeber is probably familiar to someone, so that comes from chronobiology and also has found its way into the English language. So a time giver can, for instance, be your cat. So if does anyone have a cat here? Yeah, or a dog? Yeah. But like a cat, for instance, sleeps for 15 hours a day. It eats for half a minute. Probably it's a nocturnal animal. Yeah, so you sleep a lot, but you don't sleep in the pattern that's kind of the human pattern. And it's a completely different rhythm. So, and the cat probably stares for 2 hours just sitting somewhere. So, so if you're really following that kind of rhythm, what does this do to you? How does this feel? How is your feeling to time kind of mixed up? How are you relating to your cat's life? Are you then still jealous? Or do you think, no, this is really not what I want? Or do you connect rather with one ideas with the weather? How would it be just to be outside for 48 hours and really just look at the sky, follow that rhythm? I think at the moment it's quite nice. It's from, I don't know, it's this shift between it's really warm, sunshine, rain, with lovely summer nights, and then it's really cold. What does it do? What kind of rhythm is this? So there are different ideas that I suggest for you to do on the postcards, or you just think about your own, something you always wanted to try out. Maybe there's a fictional character you really love and you just want to live that life, or you create your own Sims character and do what they do, and they shower for 2 hours and all these kind of things. Or something simple of like, I would just follow your rhythm and do everything you did today. Whenever you woke up, I don't know, I eat the same thing you do. Let's see. Better you choose your prefers, whatever they do. But it's quite intimate if you think about time, of something personal, of like there are values related to how much time do you spend for what? How much time do you spend for your body, for food, for giving time to others? All these, almost innate time. So it can be quite an interesting experience to do this. And the idea for the project came from, I did workshops with students at the Royal College of Art. And in this case, I really rented out Airbnb places. I grouped them together in small groups to 2 to 4 students. And then I asked them to develop a time giver and to live by this time giver. And it was always really quite nice, because this generation, they had to give me their phones and their laptops. And I always woke them up from that kind of experiment. And it was always nice to see that they never wanted their phones back. They really enjoyed this kind of stepping out and this feeling of probably just concentrating on something. It's not as fragmented. So this is just in a way one example of what I do. I also do more artistic installations. So often when I talk about kind of more designing time. So I'm developing time frames, even this kind of small call for action, and then I want people to experience it. So it's not about a product or a symbol of the clock. I really, really keep my distance from clocks. It's more of how you as an individual perceive time, and based on that, how we as a society can change this, that we don't have to be at some place at, 7 p.m. by the dot. I think we didn't even make it, so that's fine. Okay, good. That's so much from my side. I'll hand over to Felix.
I'll right away start with getting into the project that I'm pleased to exhibit at the Vienna Design Week this year. And it kind of describes my approach and my interests quite well. So I right away start with that. So the installation, it's called Political Atmosphere. You can see it at the main building. And it is in a way the result of a research project that lasted for several months. And it was a quite theoretical approach in the beginning, and then ended as a quite physical, viscerally experiential installation. And the installation is about the connections of flight turbulence, climate change, and war. And I started by engaging with a British meteorologist and peace researcher. He was called Louis Richardson, and already about 100 years ago, he theorized that similar methods he used to predict the weather. He was the first scientist to, with mathematical tools, predict predict the weather, and he sat there calculate in a quite mechanical way. Back then, computation was still writing variables and processing calculations by hand, as there hasn't been any computers back then. He did it for 2 weeks to just calculate a very small square on the map and try to predict the weather. And then he's seen the tragedies of First World War, and he thought, if it's possible to compute something as complex as our atmosphere, which back then rather seemed to be impossible, or it was like magic in a way, would it even be possible to predict socio-political phenomena and prevent things like conflicts and war? And this 100 years ago, and still in the present, was a quite experimental thought. And on the basis of his theories, I took his theories and I recontextualized it. I situated them in the Anthropocene, the current geological age, where the human being is the most impactful factor in our environment. And apparently there's a lot of contemporary climate science that shows that there are actually quite strong correlations between climate change and war. And of course those connections are not linear. They are quite chaotic and non-linear and not uniform. So it's pretty hard to get those connections, especially because they are distributed in time and space. Meaning if we enter an aircraft, we might only see the consequences in 5 or 10 or 20 years from now, somewhere located, somewhere completely remote from where we took the action. So I had the feeling there's a huge disconnect between our action and the consequences. And I tried to bridge this disconnect with the installation that makes those correlations be more tangible and experiential. And in this case, with political atmosphere, I tried to do so by setting up an antenna that you can see in the courtyard of the festival headquarters. And it tracks aircrafts in real time. It uses ADS-B data, which is being received from the aircrafts themselves. So they, in real time, send the position, altitude, speed, heading, and I then process and visualize this data in the installation space. And I can also calculate the flight density, which then drives a set of gears. So the more flights there are above our heads, and the more anthropogenic impact, or the more impact there is on our environment. And in this case, I took the flights as just as a representative set of data. And the faster those gears, this in a way clockwork mechanism would go. And at some point, if it aligns at the 12 o'clock position, it would ultimately trigger a siren. And this siren, in a quite physical and visceral way, makes experiential this, makes you, or shows this conflict, the tipping point in a way. And the sound really goes through your bones, so it's really a bodily feeling in a way. In its original shape, it has been 8 times louder than in its current form, but I kind of have to reduce it for safety regulations, I guess. And yeah, also the topic of turbulence was quite important in this project. By fact, the siren itself also makes sound through turbulences in a way. It's a mechanical siren. It spins with whatever 3,000 rotations per minute. And also in the research, Richardson, back then a century ago, was going into depth in the field of meteorological but also political turbulences. And he was one of those scientists who actually invented a number. It was called the Richardson number, to predict a phenomenon that was called clear air turbulence. And this kind of turbulence is a sort of a meteorological, small-scale phenomena that is mainly relevant for aircrafts. Meaning that if you sit in an aircraft and we feel those turbulences shaking, the aircraft shaking, it's mostly due to the fact that those aircrafts are actually inducing this turbulence on themselves, because climate change and the greenhouse gases those aircrafts emit, in a way, amplify those turbulences. And in my research, I was observing quite a few of those intrinsic feedback loops, which I found kind of interesting. And in fact, those small-scale phenomena are then connected with bigger meteorological phenomena, like the jet stream. And the jet stream is, in a way, an aerial superhighway, and it affects extreme weather events worldwide. So if there might be a drought or extreme rain, it might be to one of those because of one of those bigger meteorological systems that are currently quite a lot in change. And I also looked into the Syrian conflict and the Darfur crisis that are quite frequently referenced when people are talking about the effects of climate change on conflict and war. And it happens that, just to give an example, the Syrian conflict was preceded by a drought that was the worst in over 600 years. And of course, this is just like climate change just amplifies those things. It's not the single event or the single trigger of this. It's one in many variables that affect those systems, and that's also quite important to understand. And yeah, in a way, also in my other work, it's very much about making those, bridging those gaps and making those invisible systems and complex relationships understandable and more tangible. And yeah, I mean, I very much welcome you, if you haven't seen it, to just come over and listen to it. Thanks.
Thanks, Felix. Thanks, Helga. I'll kick off with a couple of questions. Helga, I was wondering, with your really provocative, such a simple yet so provocative, your thinking around how we re-examine time or rethink time. And I'm torn in a way that there are a couple of things. For some people, time is a privilege, isn't it? For people around the world, this possibility of stopping and not worrying about time is not even available. That possibility is not available. On the other hand, you might argue that for a lot of people, that possibility is available, but that we are trapped within capitalist systems that mean that we have to be available and 24/7. So there is this dichotomy between how do we step out of either this kind of demand that time puts on us, or on the other hand, for those who really don't have the opportunity to think outside of what they need to do now.
Yeah, I think there are two things. I think if you talk about the Western idea of time, or within this context here, in our society, what is valued highest, I think the philosopher Byung-Chul Han talks about vita activa, and then you have the vita contemplativa. In our society, it's the vita activa that's valued. So normally it's like, so what did you do last weekend? And then or what did you see this weekend, hopefully? And you're like, I saw all this and this. And the more, in a way, the better kind of mentality. And so the busy one, these are the one that's on the kind of highest level. And then you have the contemplative life. So if someone just tells you, I just watched Netflix, you're like, oh, great, you're interesting. Well, depends on what you're watching. But I think just looking at our society, what we value, if someone is not busy, it was quite strange. Again, Corona does a bit something with it, because I think we all had to slow down. We all probably experienced a certain quality of life with things slowing down to a certain degree. Depends on what you want to have back. But I think what you mentioned, Anna, was there was one project I haven't done yet, but I thought of calling it Shift the Shifts. Because if you look at our society and how time is split, then you have, in a way, the privileged ones who can work during the daytime hours, the one you choose to work, and then you have those who work night shifts. And we have a few exceptions of highly paid people like doctors and pilots, But otherwise, you really have a split. So I think when I was in the US, at the university, it's very obvious. So during daytime, it was the students and the professors owning the building, and then there came the cleaners and guards, and that was their rhythm. And I myself did, for 1 month, I worked in a car manufacturing company, night shift, from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. And you are just completely out of the societal system. So, and you know, it's the whole rhythm is completely disturbed. And I think that's the thing of like this privilege, who can choose to work when they want, yeah. So time, you can really split that through. If someone has this kind of serenity to really choose, that is a privilege, and the others are just forced. In the US, it's probably even more extreme with them having 2 or 3 jobs just to kind of do that. So I think there was with this kind of the shift project, the idea of like maybe the opening and things, we would just adjust this to a night shift schedule. So every one of the privileged one have to work to that schedule. So university would start at 11 p.m. And maybe the openings of something would be at 7 a.m. So it is when they come up for work, and then they can go for a drink and so on. To just kind of, in a way, highlight that, yes, you have to be in a certain position to have the serenity of your time.
Oh, thank you. Fascinating, even more provocative. I mean, I think some of my students would like coming in at 11 p.m. I don't think they sleep at night. I don't know what they do. Yeah, I thought so. Felix, I wanted to ask you very quickly about this relationships that, Williamson's research. Obviously, I'm aware of all your research, but it's still fascinating and terrifying, the connections you're starting to make between climate change, climate crisis, and war, and, flight turbulence. And I'm just wondering that some of the speculative work that we do is about thinking of the second and third level consequences of things. That if you do here, this could lead to this, and so you're speculating of those. And I'm wondering if you've come across any other such kind of, I'm just curious, interconnected things that you might have found during your research.
I lately came across a paper that was kind of interesting that showed how particles in a way that are emitted in the atmosphere. It showed in a way how those correlate with migration patterns of humans in a way, and how I would have to check in detail, to be honest. But in a way, there have been a lot of those feedback loops that I talked about, and those connections. But what struck me the most is that in a way this disruption, in a way that you like we take an action and we can't really feel the consequences, because it just works with a completely different time scale in a way. And also if we emit those particles, for example, in industrial countries, they might have an effect on areas in the Sahel region of Africa, for example, because those regions are way more volatile to those climatic changes, as they are already on the edge, on the boundary, and so in a way, third world countries, or countries that are already under stress, they have the most, they feel the consequences of our action the most, in a way, and that's quite frightening, actually.
Yeah, and that I think is at the heart of a lot of the climate justice work that people are doing. Yes. It's really quite scary where we are headed. Thank you. I wonder if we have questions from the audience. Anybody would like to ask questions? No? I mean,
probably be nice to hear, I think, also if you want to talk about one of your kind of more speculative activism projects. I think as part of this. If you feel, I don't know, if you want to, you don't have to, but I think it would be nice to hear your thinking about this as well.
I wasn't planning to. I mean, I suppose my only comment would be that, for a very long time, it has been hard to justify how such work could be considered design. And I'm just really, really happy that we are having this conversation here in the Design Week, because it is just opening up the possibilities of where we can go without being too precious about our disciplinary boundaries. So I would say that, and I love the phrasing of speculative activism, because I think a lot of our work or my work as a form of slow activism. So, the idea that you present something speculative like your work or Felix's work, where you're allowing people to see things or imagine things they would not have been able to imagine otherwise. So you become a catalyst in taking people through the journey, through this imagination process. And I think in doing so, you have people who will critically reflect on things they would not have done otherwise. And so I think that is the form of slow activism, because it doesn't happen instantly. It is not that you're out on the streets with your placards, but you are presenting things in ways that haven't been presented before. So I just think that's really powerful. You don't see the immediate quote-unquote impact of it, but I think we will. And I think I would just say that keep on keeping on, keep doing what you're doing. But yeah, that's all I have to say.
Maybe someone, maybe a question came up now. Yeah, here's one.
Because when I don't know, maybe I missed something now that Anna said, that answered my question anyway. But when I wrote the text to announce the talk, I thought, like, why do we call it speculative design? Like, what's the connecting factor? And then I sort of the one thing that is the bridge really are the tools, right? You take something, you take the same methodology that you use to design a product, and you design a question, as Anna said in the beginning. What I wondered about was whether, if you want to do a really radical critique of a system, yet you use the tools that we every day use to build and maintain the system, is that possible, or is that even more effective than using revolutionary tools, or might it just be an excuse and those tools that work within the system can't work against the system?
And first of all, Anna, do you hear it? Yeah, you hear it. Okay.
Yes, really good question,
yeah. No, I think repeat the question for the screen. That's.
I got it. I think it's a really good question about the tools. Like, do we use tools that people are familiar with in every day in order to question? And I think that depends on what you're doing, I would say. So some of the work we've done is that we've created this apartment from the future, which is a very domestic setting, which is situated in a world, in a particular geographical context that is completely altered because of the climate crisis. And so the intention over there was to make people, just put people into a very familiar space directly. So you open the door and you are inside an apartment and it feels very familiar. So you use the familiarity to start introducing the strange and the uncanny. Because once you are able to get their attention that they know this is familiar, then we started introducing different evidences and fragments of a different or an altered world. And that transition was really important because it helped them suspend disbelief in ways that if you just confronted them with something that was radically different, would help. We've seen in the past, it often puts people into a defensive mode where they go, oh, this is not going to happen to me. This is somebody else's problem, not my problem. And we really wanted to get people to understand that this could this feels like a home that could be your home, and yet it's familiar yet different. So that tool or that kind of instrument of familiarity did help. But there are some instances where, like Felix's project with this, I suppose the motor is quite familiar, but and the sound is a familiar instrument. But I'd let Felix speak about that a bit, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, I'm not sure how much of speculation in this case, in this work, political atmosphere actually is, because it's in a way very much based in the presence and based on contemporary and historical research. And but what is interesting to me is that in a way our knowledge bases and the knowledge we have about the world is shifting quite a lot at this very moment. And what I mean by that is that all the information about our environment, all the models of the world we have, they change because the breeding patterns, the fish spawning cycles, maybe information that was stored in ice cores for several hundreds and hundreds of years, it's melting away. It's in a way gone, and it's quite ironical because we have more and more powerful tools to model our environment and to get data about our environment. Still, we lose grasp of understanding this earth we are living in a way. And in that sense, I think as a designer, it's important to have a quite qualitative understanding of our of systems, of our environment, and also I think a more generalist approach in comparison to a specialized approach is can be a key factor if we are talking about design. As I think working across disciplines is super important, and we will still need specialists in every of those fields. But those specialists are in a way very prone to bias, and if design tries to have a more holistic understanding, I think we can more easily adapt to fluid changes. And I think that this fluidity is what we currently need, as all of the past systems we had are shifting and in change.
Definitely, that's a really good point about seeing across these different connections is possible if you have that generalist perspective. Helga, I wondered if you wanted to comment on the instrument side.
Yeah, I think going to Gabriel's point where it was like, okay, we are within this capitalist system, and we're using these tools within. I think with time, of course, you have like the way we talk about time is the same we talk about money. So we spend, save, waste, and so on. So of course there was a strong in my work really, okay, how do we push against that kind of system? But definitely in my work I make use, and it goes what Felix was saying as well, of like making use of looking at other disciplines and their methods. How are this goes especially into kind of design research, but probably to give an example of like how do I approach this? Because there was this idea of like, okay, so if you want a new system or something, then there was the idea of unlearning, but how do we get there? And then I worked together with chronobiologists and looked at their methods. And I think one of those experiments in the 70s that was sponsored by NASA was, so they drilled a hole really at a mountain in Munich, in Andex, so that's by Munich. So because they didn't know how the biological clock works, so they really wanted to shield these people. So they had to live in this apartment that was drilled into this mountain for like 2 to 3 months. You could never do this kind of experiment now, ethically, and all these kind of things, but there was no internet, so no one missed the internet. So, you put in students who wrote their PhD in there, so all fine. But it was this kind of thing of like, you put this person in there and then remove all time givers, and they just had to in a way, guess when always press a button when they think an hour has passed, and then they kind of monitor their rhythm. And in a way, they found out that the body clock kind of completely desynchronizes when there is no time giver or nothing, no input. So our body always needs that. And some people experienced like a normal day. So they had like 48, 53 hour-long day, but they experienced it just as one. So they just eat 8 straight times, so their body completely desynchronized. It was a bit of the feeling when you have a jet lag, where your visual system arrives before your digestive system arrives, and then mingle, and at some point you're back again. But it was these kind of things of like working with these experiments where people test a different system, what was taken out of that system, that I then took on for myself, called it a kind of time giver method. So I had a basis for it, so these are methods that are existing in our system, but you as a designer collaborate, work with them, and make them to a different kind of experiential piece that kind of really pushes against the existing system.
Great. No, that's fascinating insights. Thank you. I wonder if there are any other questions?
I guess you were commissioned by an international committee to design a new calendar system for all of us. So how would you start? Would you say yes?
That's amazing. Okay, first of all, did you hear? Yeah?
I didn't get the
question. Okay, I think that's my favorite question ever. So if I would get commissioned from an international committee to kind of design a calendar for all of us, how would it look like? And so I think I work a lot with sociologists and chronobiologists because I'm really intrigued by body rhythms. The reason I'm working with body rhythms has to do, so first we had natural rhythms that kind of dictated our life, and then the current clock societal system is based originally on these natural systems. So the week is the kind of only artificial time time category we have. Yeah. And now, looking at our society, we are quite removed, sadly, but I think a lot of people working on it from natural rhythms. So it's just think about how much you're outside yourself every day. So are we just more observing the weather, or are we really living outside? So on average, people are outside an hour on a work day, or Monday to Saturday, and in the weekend it's a bit more. But so the kind of removement from the natural rhythms, and then a lot of people. So we have this like more temporal serenity, so that you can really you can choose your work patterns, which will happen more and more. If this is so, you're moving away from the typical 9-to-5 system, which then means so you're moving away from that societal system. And in a way, that's where pretty much the question started for me, of like, okay, what is given then if we need to rethink a system? And then it's like, well, you always have your body somehow, and there is a given rhythm that always exists, that can be manipulated. We know it by coffee, by other good drugs you can take, whatever, to push you, cocaine and so on, or you just override it and don't sleep. So like 200 years we used to sleep in average 10 hours. Now we are at 6 to 7 hours. Maybe with Corona we are going back to 8, 9, which is good. Yeah. So, but I think that's for me the kind of body rhythms are really interesting for me, and I've developed a kind of project that's based on the circadian rhythm, so that's your bodily rhythm. And it's what I really try to establish. One side, on a more medical side, is kind of a chronotherapy, where for burnout patients, they start to learn about your body rhythms, but also on an artistic side of kind of experiments where I show you what are these, in a way, I divided the day into 7 different stages, and for you to experience this. And we can, in a way, I did a 24-hour piece at Somerset House where people could just come in, and there were 70 different rooms based on these body rhythms. And you could just dive into the zone where you just felt like, you know, are you in the sleep phase, are you in the wake-up phase, are you in the cognitive performance phase, wide awake, bright light, the kind of movement, or in the sleepiness phase, and you'd rather listen to a poet, and you can lay down and give us a soft kind of lighting. Yeah, so it would, but you can think about this, time is a synchronization device in a way, so this is how we manage at the moment that we all come together here. But it could also work on the basis of body rhythms. So everyone who is hopefully in a sort of concentration phase, or maybe you want to more be in an intuitive phase where you're creative and inspired, and that's how we come together and have this sort of conversation. So you could think, instead of moving through clock time, so the alarm clock, then you get up, then at 9 you leave the house, go to work, at 10 you start working, you would just naturally wake up, have your wake-up phase, and then start when you come into the cognitive performance phase, your concentration is best, then you're in the spaces with others that are just at that peak time. So you can, so that would be probably my preferred system.
That's quite human-centered again, right? So you could also, is your body really the only given, or could you also say, well, it's about, I don't know, how a tree or a plant perceives time, or I don't know.
Right, so, but that's the thing, if you go to, that depends on the structure with your body rhythm. So if we all go camping, then within a week, we're all very much attuned to very similar rhythms. Because we all live a kind of city-urban indoor life, where we're exposed to very little light. So indoor light, I always compare indoor light to microwave food. So it's pretty, yeah, that's the same quality. We are really not there. So the lux rate intensity quality is very different if you go outside. So in this city environment, this is where we all drift off and become drift where our chronotype comes into place. But this scenario doesn't need to be in this urban environment and what you're saying. It could be a much more natural-based one where we become element of this again. And light is the strongest time given for our body. So that would then really trigger your human. So in that sense, it's only human-centered because we are in our human structures. Yeah. So I think that's the kind of next level of thinking about it. I'm sure if you guys...
I'm having a further question. Do you already thought about what happens if everyone is a review shadow with the environment and with the working instead of this? What further factors change the life then?
The question is, what kind of further factors would influence our life when
your new shadow works out for everyone?
Okay, if my circadian system would actually be in place. Well, so there's the thing of probably to a degree is probably jumping back. Let's go 500 years back or something. Yeah, so the clock system is not that old. Yeah.
But we are more people right now, it's different. It's totally different than if you go 5 million years back.
You don't need to go 5 million, just 500 will probably do. So it's just like this societal construct was kind of different if you small. So in a way, synchronization wasn't done necessarily through clock time. Yeah, it was much more based on kind of sunshine hours and so on, and different working patterns. Of course, I think it would be a real reinvention, but I think there are different elements, and I think that would be nice also to bring you back in of what we are working, so the kind of work we do. So how do we kind of reconnect so in a way our living standard? Do we have to rethink? At the moment everything's very human-centered. I think that's a huge project. I think for a few years now this discussion that we have to move away, and that would mean we are changing our complete kind of work living structures, being more embedded. I have not thought how this would on that scale really looks like. And you have to, it's a worldwide scale, so some time is also very different in how it is developed. So the westernized system is extremely high developed to a degree about the kind of synchronization. For us, fragmentation is quite high, while if you go probably to poorer countries where they live in much poorer conditions, but also closer probably still to nature and all these factors, where time is not as valuable as in this Western system, and the change is probably not as much as it is here in the Western system, if that makes sense. Yeah, but I think maybe it makes sense also to, I don't know, do you want to follow up on that question? If a circadian system would make sense, and what it would change in ways of living.
I'm just curious about what do you do? How do you, like, in your own life personally, like, what are your boundaries around time? Like, do you put your phone aside and not keep, like, worry about it for a while? Do you do all these things every day as kind of practices, or?
Well, so I did have the luxury of when you write a PhD and you meet your PhD supervisor once a month, you have a lot of luxury because that's the only time you really have to check. So that was quite nice because then I had time to do kind of time experiments. But my rhythm is then I started a full-time job at university, then you're thrown back into a system, yeah, and then it's a bit of a fight, yeah. And I have the luxury that I structure that course, so I can in a way work with the timing again. So of course that's a luxury that I can do that. But the plan is really to develop a circadian curriculum for the students that works with their body rhythm. But I do things, I think, really of like, I don't use an alarm clock. And I'm very aware when my concentration times are. And this is where, yes, I block these periods of time. And I also know after lunch, between 1 and 3, not much meaningful things come out of my mouth and my brain and whatsoever. Yeah. So it's just this, huh? Yeah. I'm just.
And there was a very interesting thing about the naps, right? Like why people used to take naps in the middle of the day.
Yes. Yeah, so it really it pushes your concentration level. So because the natural rhythm is that you have 2 sleep phases. So the Spanish siesta is really the kind of model. But it's this kind of awareness of like, why do you force yourself? That's why I found it, when I worked in studios, I always find it really difficult that you have to be creative at a certain point, and it just never worked. But it's this kind of freedom of like understanding how your rhythm works. And do you leave time, if you look at this circadian system of like, there's an active phase where you should move 4 to 5 hours. And also makes us aware of like, there's not just this kind of brain work and just sitting there. There's also this physical element where, well, we're all sitting, aren't we? Where you're also part of rethinking how we live. And I think that's also a huge impact on, yeah.
If I may,
yes.
Do you think there's a way to manage timescales that go across generations? And I mean, understanding impacts or understanding bigger cycles of nature, of life that precedes the human timescale in a way, and the 24-hour or the bodily cycle of a human. So in a way, because in my work I always thought like this is a huge problem in a way. We are not made to think across generations. We are not made to think what our actions might what of the consequences in the generations after. So in a way, we give on the knowledge, of course, to the next generations to a certain degree at least. But do you think something like that can be managed through time as well, or is there another understanding of time as the humanity as a whole, or did you go into that at some point?
To a certain degree, so I think that I forgot where it was, but there's a tribe, and always when they make a decision, they think about 7 generations. If all these kind of 7 generations would agree to this, so 3 generations before and 3 generations after, and I think that's such a nice thought to embed in your thinking, because it's still to a degree tangible, because you can think of like your grandparents and maybe some grandparents. So it is not so abstract that you think like, ugh, it doesn't, you know. And the other thing is of like, of course, then it goes into deep time. And I find it also when we looking at projects, and if you think about designing on a long-term scale, and there's the do you all know the Long Now project, the clock? And it's a completely mechanical device. Yeah, so all we do now is all this digital and little devices and but if you really think that's the future, everything will be sensors and if you really think about the future, it's probably very mechanical again. In that sense, if we are designing, because this couldn't be understood over generations. This is what so I think it's quite fascinating just to start thinking about the design process. How does this in a way influenced by a really long time scale and not just the next 5, 10, 20 years.
That's great. I mean, that's a kind of a, I mean, let's think across generations and through deep time is a, I wonder if there are no more questions, is a perfect way to kind of wrap up what feels like a wonderful day. I don't know how it is. What's the vibe in the room?
Well, from my point, I'm very grateful to have you all here tonight and in the festival, because we are convinced in the team of Vienna Design Week that we want to provide a really broad insight to design. I think what we've heard tonight, for me, it is exactly what we will need for generations, maybe, but what it needs in a design festival to raise thoughts and to go ahead. So, yeah, I'm very grateful to have you all here, and one thing that I'd be interested in is, Helga, what are you planning for your 2 weeks of quarantine that you are facing after Vienna Design Week? And when will we have you back in Vienna, Anna?
I mean, I have to work with the quarantine and my son's school, so it's all a bit messy at the minute, trying to figure it out. Yeah.
Yeah, I think in London, you don't really want to leave your house. So I think I knew it. You know, now my partner has to do the shopping and things like that. I'm fine. It's all good. Yeah. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you. No, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Just a quick word. Thank you again. Just a quick word, organizational wise. Maybe if we all make our way out of the room one after the other, so that there's not a big bunch of people at the exit. So thank you. Thanks for your attention. Thanks for talking. It was a great discussion. Have a nice evening.
Bye. 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 Bye.